the year the governor's daughter brought forth her children. A storm hung over Charleston like a held breath. Summer heat lay thick upon the city, pressed down from a sky the color of pewter. On Meeting Street, horses threw their heads against their harnesses, flanks shimmering with sweat. The smell of the harbor, salt, dead fish, the dank rot of marsh, rose and drifted inland with each sluggish gust that tried and failed to break the heaviness. At the great house of Governor Nathaniel Harrow, the air inside was no easier to breathe. Every candle seemed to smoke. The great brass clock in the front hall, imported from London at a cost everyone in Charleston knew and discussed, ticked with a sound that reminded the servants of something gnawing at bone. They moved soft-footed through that house, the enslaved men and women whose bodies held up its walls as surely as the brick and mortar. Their hands were quick with linen and silver, their eyes careful not to rise too high. But that evening, even the most practiced faces betrayed it, a flicker of fear, of expectation, of something like dread. Upstairs, in the room with the tall windows that overlooked the garden and the spires of St. Michael's beyond, the governor's only child labored. Annabel Harrow had once been the brightest ornament of Charleston society. Men had crossed from Beaufort and Georgetown to dance with her beneath crystal chandeliers, to see the way candlelight shone in her hair. That hair lay now in damp ropes across her cheeks and neck, wild and stuck to her as though it, too, struggled with each contraction. She gripped the carved posts of the bed so hard her knuckles blanched. Sweat soaked through the thin shift clinging to her and darkened the linen beneath her hips. She had cried out loudly at first. As the hours passed and the pain carved new lines in her face, her cries had thinned to something hoarse and low, as if she had grown ashamed of the sound. At the foot of the bed, Scylla bent to her work. They called her Aunt Scylla in the Harrow house, though she had never borne a child of her own. 70 years sat in the slopes of her shoulders and the grooves at the corners of her mouth, but her hands never shook. They had delivered more soldiers and planters and poor white mill girls into the world than the gentlemen doctors ever admitted. Tonight those hands were slick with the governor's daughter's blood. The doctor stood to one side, a tall, gaunt man from Philadelphia, whose English training had not yet adapted to the Charleston heat. His cravat lay untied about his neck, his powdered wig sat slightly askew, and his spectacles slid slowly down his nose as he peered between Annabel's knees with a look that mingled clinical interest and a discomfort he would not have confessed. "Steady your breathing, Miss Harrow," he said, though he had told her this many times already, as if breath were something she simply refused to take properly. Annabel's eyes, pale green like her father's, flashed toward him, then past him, to where her father stood at the room's edge in the shadow of the bed hangings. The governor's hands were clasped behind his back so tightly that the cords of his wrists stood out. His face, broad and ruddy from years on the floor of the assembly, had drawn inward. He had never been comfortable with women's bodies, even when his beloved wife had still been alive. The sight of his only child like this, splayed and open and groaning, seemed to him indecent, even though he had demanded to be present. It was his right. They were his blood, his house, his name. No man, he thought, should ever have to stand outside a door and wait to hear whether his line lived or died. Outside, thunder rolled somewhere over the harbor. The windows trembled. Scylla, who had delivered babies by lamplight through the worst of summer storms and the deadliest of fevers, muttered under her breath in a language older than Charleston. She felt with practiced fingers, measuring. The baby's head lay low, the bones of the skull pressing against the birth passage. "Time now, Miss Annabel," she said, her voice low but firm. "When dat next pain come, you push. You push like you ain't got nothing left and den find more." Annabel panted, eyes tightly shut. She could not bring herself to look down. The sight of her own blood frightened her in a way nothing else had, not even the nights when she woke with her heart hammering, remembering, no, she would not remember that now. She could not. All Charleston knew the official story, that Annabel's husband, handsome Captain Julian Carter, had died 2 years before of yellow fever caught at the docks, like so many others. They did not know how close he had come to leaving her with nothing. They did not know how the timing on her swelling belly had caused ladies to lean toward one another behind fans and murmur. Governor Harrow knew, and he had made it absolutely clear that nothing, could be allowed to stain his daughter's name or his own. Not after he had fought so hard for his office. Not now, with men up the coast and up north beginning to whisper about slavery, about conscience. He was a man who walked a precarious line between the planters who fed his coffers and the statesmen who weighed his words in Washington. Scandal, he believed, could sink him faster than any storm. The next contraction took Annabel like a wave. She bucked against it with a guttural sound that was not quite human. Scylla's hands were ready. "They're now," Scylla murmured. "They're now, come on, lil one. We waitin'." The baby slid into her hands with a wet rush and a cry like a cat's first startled wail. Scylla caught the small, slippery body and lifted it, quick and sure, before it could slip back into danger. She cleared its mouth, patted the tiny back, and the cry grew stronger, angrier, as if the child already resented having been forced from a warm, dark place into the harsh candlelit air. "A girl," the doctor announced, relief in his voice. "Healthy." Scylla did not need his words. Her own practiced glance had told her. Good color, strong lungs, limbs that flailed in furious protest. She wrapped the baby in linen and held her up. Annabel's head lolled toward the sound. When her eyes fell on the face of her child, her first, the proof that this ordeal had an end, something in her expression loosened. The muscles of her neck, her jaw, seemed to soften in a way that made her, just for a moment, look like the girl she had been at 16 with flowers in her hair. "Caroline," she whispered, though she had not consulted anyone about the name. "Caroline," the governor flinched. That had been his wife's name, but he said nothing. The baby, her skin pale and rosy, her hair a sheen of damp gold against her soft skull, did look as if that name might suit her. "Let the child be cleaned," he managed. "Miss Harrow must rest." Scylla glanced up, one eyebrow quirking almost imperceptibly. Rest. The afterbirth had not yet come, but men always thought labor ended with the first cry. The doctor seemed to share the governor's faith that the worst was over. He relaxed, pushing his spectacles back up his nose. "Yes, now he broke off as Annabel stiffened, a sudden harsh tension running through her like a rope pulled taut. Her fingers clawed at the bedding. The thin cry she gave now was not like the triumphant agony of before. It was surprised, horrified, as if she recognized an enemy she had hoped was past. "No," she gasped. "Please, no more." Scylla's instincts flared. She bent quickly, pressing a hand to Annabel's belly. Beneath the slackened skin, the flesh was not empty. It was still hard in places, still shaped. "Doctor," she said, a warning in her voice he did not at first heed. "She ain't done." "It is the afterbirth," he said dismissively. A nuisance, but another contraction seized Annabel, ripping a raw scream from her throat. This one felt different, deeper. Her whole body curved around it. Scylla's hand did not lie. The swell beneath it shifted, a slow, unmistakable turning. The old woman looked up sharply, her dark eyes locking with the doctor's. "She carry two," she said flatly. "You ain't see, but I feel, dare another one." The color drained from the doctor's face. Twins increased danger. The second often came wrong, turned or tangled in the cord, stubbornly reluctant to join the world. He had seen women ripped and bled out, seen babies who came with their necks already broken. Governor Harrow moved closer, his boots soundless on the thick rug. "What is she saying?" "Your daughter carries twins, sir," the doctor said, his formal tone returning as if it might anchor him. "There is a second child." "Another," the governor's mouth tightened. Twins could be a sign of blessing, some said. Others thought them an omen. 2 mouths to feed, 2 heirs to quarrel. He thought fleetingly of how tales already circled his daughter's condition. 2 children born where there ought to be one might set tongues wagging anew. Annabel's eyes rolled white as another wave hit. "I can't," she sobbed. "Father, I can't bear." "You can," Scylla said, her voice dropping to something stern and iron. "You got no choice now, Chilly. This one waitin'. He ain't leavin' till you bring him." Annabel whispered, but the word was lost in the way her body took over. Outside the tall windows, the first fat drops of rain struck the glass like thrown pebbles. Lightning flickered, a pale blue-white behind the heavy curtains. The candles in the room guttered and flamed higher. The second child took longer. Minutes stretched between contractions, long, tense intervals in which Annabel lay half-conscious, lips moving around prayers she had not uttered since she was a girl at her mother's sickbed. The doctor fretted, muttering about malpresentation instruments. He gestured once toward the leather case on the table, the one that held steel hooks and blades. Scylla shook her head sharply, barring his path. "You put dat steel near dis girl," she said quietly, but there was death in the way she said it. "And I swear by every spirit watchin' dis house, you gon' regret it." He started to protest, then saw something in her eyes and held his tongue. For all his training, there were ways of this place he did not understand, and some part of him still feared the old stories of conjure women and curses spoken under breath. Again the contraction seized Annabel, and this time Scylla saw it. A shadow emerging, a slick dark curve that was not the gentle dome of a skull but the bunched flesh of a shoulder. Breach, she thought. Stubborn. This one did not want to come head first, orderly. She hooked her fingers with impossible gentleness, turning, coaxing, speaking half to the child, half to whatever watched. "Come on now, lil' man," she murmured, as if she already knew though she had not checked. "You ain't gon' stay in no more. Your time done come." At last, in a rush that seemed to tear something inside Annabel, the second child slid free. For a moment the room went utterly still. Even the storm seemed to hold its breath. The baby did not cry at once. He lay limp in Scylla's hands, small and slick with blood and birth fluids, his head lolling. For one scraping second she feared he had been born dead. Then his chest hitched. A thin mule rose, turning into a wavering, rusty wail as his lungs remembered what they were meant to do. "A boy," Scylla announced, her own breath coming out in a long, relieved sigh. "You got a boy, Miss Annabel." Annabel could not lift her head. Her eyes fluttered, unfocused. "A boy," she echoed, the words both wonder and terror. She had not thought to have even one child survive. Now she had two, a matching pair, one of each, like something out of a book of fables. Scylla brought the baby closer to the light. His skin was a shade darker than his sister's, not by much, but enough that in this room it looked like a question. His hair, plastered to his skull, was almost black. When his eyes opened briefly, they were a deep, uncanny blue that would settle in time into something else. But it was not his coloring that drew Scylla's breath from her chest and made her forget, just for a heartbeat, the proper way to cross herself in the shadows of her mind. It was the mark. From the boy's left shoulder, down across his chest and curling toward the center of his ribs, lay a stain in the skin, darker than the rest, as if wine had been spilled under the surface and could not be rubbed away. It was not the blotchy, formless patch she had seen on other babes with birthmarks. This had shape. In the flickering candlelight, Scylla saw it clearly, a circle broken at one point with a twisted line hanging down like a noose. Or turned slightly, it resembled the iron brand she had seen heated in the plantation forge when she was a girl. An H, wrought in a cruel, elaborate script that they had pressed into the shoulders of men and women who had run, who had fought, who had dared lift their hands against their masters. That brand had marked them forever as property and as trouble. Scylla's knees wanted to buckle. She had to catch herself on the side of the bed. Behind her, the governor spoke in a voice grown suddenly rough. Is there some deformity?" The doctor, craning his neck, had caught a glimpse, his lips pressed thin. "A mere pigmentation flaw, I'm sure," he said too quickly. "Many children are born with such things. It fades often." But Scylla knew. She had seen too many bodies, too many scars. The iron brand had seared its shape into her memory long ago, along with the screams that had echoed across the fields. The same shape, now written in a child's skin from birth. She glanced at Annabel. The girl's eyes had latched weakly onto her son's face. For a moment she did not seem to see anything but him. "Let me," her voice cracked. "Let me hold him." Before Scylla could move, the governor stepped between them. "No," he said, more sharply than he had spoken all evening. "Not yet." Annabel flinched as if struck. "Father, he must be cleaned," Governor Harrow said, his gaze fixed, not on the boy's face, but on the mark that lay coiled there like a word someone had dared carve into his family's flesh. "And examined. We do not yet know if he is healthy." Healthy. The boy's thin wails filled the room, rising and falling with clear, outraged strength. Scylla felt anger flash through her. She swallowed it. Her place in this house, her life, depended on her tongue. Still she could not help but murmur very softly, "He got a stronger cry than most, sah." The governor's eyes cut to her, hard and cold. For all that she had caught his child and that child's children, she was still to him a woman he owned. He could sell her tomorrow if he chose to some rice swamp farther south. "Take that cloth," he said to the doctor, gesturing toward the folded stack of towels. "Cover it." "The mark?" the doctor asked, hesitant. "Yes, cover it now." The doctor, relieved to have something to do, obeyed. He wrapped the baby briskly, drawing linen tight across that dark shape as if it might smother it. The boy cried louder, his face reddening to a furious plum color. Scylla knew the sound of a child protesting not just cold air, but a deeper discomfort, something under his skin. She whispered in words no one else in the room could understand. "Hush now, chillun. World already tryin' to hide you, and you ain't been here an hour." The rain outside came harder. Wind rattled the panes, making the old house mutter in its joints. Downstairs, in the smoky comfort of the parlor, men's voices rose and fell as the governor's guests sipped brandy and pretended not to listen for any sign from above. Outside the gates, in the narrow alleys where water began to gather in the ruts, enslaved men looked up at the sky and wondered what storm the night would bring. Governor Harrow took a step closer to the doctor, his voice dropping so low that only Scylla, standing near, could hear. "There was only one child," he said. The doctor blinked. "I beg you will record that Miss Harrow bore a single, healthy daughter," the governor continued, each word clipped and precise. "Do you understand? There was only one child." The doctor stared at the wriggling bundle in his hands. "But sir, the boy," the governor's gaze hardened. "Look at him," he said. "Look." The doctor did. He saw the darker tint of the infant's skin, the shadow of black hair, the hint, though he would not have dared name it, of features that did not entirely match Captain Julian Carter's portrait downstairs. He thought of gossip, of how quickly it spread in a town like this. He thought of his practice, his own fragile reputation. And he thought, too, of the mark. The peculiar, unsettling mark. A man of science, he told himself such things meant nothing, but he was still a man of his time. Superstitions clung. "You see," the governor said softly. The doctor licked his lips. "I see the complications, sir." "You see a child," Scylla said, unable to stop herself. "Dat what you see, a child got as much right to breath as any." The governor rounded on her. "You will hold your tongue, woman," he snapped. "Or I will have it cut out." He meant it. Scylla could hear it. She had known men who blustered and men who did not. Nathaniel Harrow had not clawed his way to the governor's mansion without learning when to make good on a threat. She bowed her head, though rage and something like fear knotted in her chest. "Yes, sir," Annabel moaned softly from the bed. "Father, what are you saying?" The governor forced a smile onto his face before he turned back toward her, the mask of the doting parent settling over his features with practiced ease. "Nothing you need trouble yourself with, my dear," he said. "You have done marvelously. Your daughter is strong and beautiful. We will let you rest." "My son," the word came out as if it cost her more than any contraction. She had not been prepared for him. She had not known he existed until pain pulled him into the world. And yet, now that he had come, she could not imagine him simply vanished. Nathaniel Harrow hesitated. Then he walked to the side of the bed and took his daughter's hand, careful to avoid the blood that had soaked the sheets. "Annabel," he said, his voice softening almost convincingly. "Listen to me. Charleston is a small town, no matter how it pretends at being a city. People talk. They already talk. You are a widow. Your cycle of grief and your present condition did not align as they should have. You know this." Shame flickered in her eyes. She had counted months as she watched her belly swell. She had heard the whispers, seen the way some of her former friends had begun to cross the street rather than greet her. "The world will forgive one miracle," the governor continued. "A single, late-arriving child. They might even praise it, but two," his fingers tightened around hers, "twins born under such circumstances will only feed their malice. They will pick apart every day, every hour of your morning. They will ask who the father really was." The last words hung between them like the ringing aftermath of a struck bell. Annabel's throat worked. She looked up at him with a gaze that held an old, weary knowledge. "You think I do not already hear those questions here," she whispered, touching her own temple with a trembling hand. "You think I do not know what you must wonder." He flinched, but he did not deny it. "I will not have your life or my name dragged through the mud for the sake of His gaze flicked, involuntarily, toward the doctor's arms, toward the bundle from which faint mewls still rose. "For the sake of an unfortunate complication." Annabel's lips parted in a silent protest. No sound came. She was too exhausted to form it fully. Tears, sudden and hot, slid sideways into her hair. Scylla stood rooted. She wanted to put the boy in his mother's arms. She wanted to press the girl's hand to that strange, dark mark and see what would happen. She wanted, impossibly, to defy the man who spoke as if God himself had hatched inside his skull. But she had learned over 7 decades exactly how far she could push, and when the cliff edge gave way. The governor saw her hesitation and mistook it for another kind of defiance. "He is to be taken out of this house," he said in a tone of finality. "He does not bear my name. He does not exist." Annabel shuddered. "Please," she whispered. "Please, Father, I carried him. And you will carry your head high through every drawing room from here to Columbia," he said with a politician's brutal lovelessness. "You will not be pitied. You will not be scorned. I have secured this life for you, for my granddaughter. Do not throw it away." He released her hand. It fell limp, fingers still slightly curled as if holding something that was no longer there. He turned back to Scylla. "You will take the boy," he said. "He will be registered as the property of this household, a foundling if anyone asks. You will see that he is placed where he can be of use in time, placed, like a chair in another room, like a stone in a wall." Scylla felt something drained from her. She had seen children sold away from mothers before. But never like this, not with the mother and child under the same roof, divided by a lie. "You gone make that boy a slave in the house where he born?" she asked before she could pull the words back. The governor's jaw worked. "Better a slave than drowned in the harbor," he said coldly. Annabel made a choked sound. The doctor glanced at the door as if calculating whether he could slip out unnoticed. "Do we understand one another?" Nathaniel Harrow asked. Scylla stared at him. In her mind she saw the iron brand again, glowing in the forge, the screaming shoulders that flinched away. She saw the mark on the boy's skin, written there without any man's hand. Some things, she thought, could not be hidden, no matter how many fine words you laid over them. "Yes, sir," she said at last, her voice a low rasp. "We understand." She stepped forward and reached for the boy. For a moment the doctor resisted, as if he had forgotten that the bundle in his hands was not his, not in any way that mattered. Then he surrendered the child to her. The boy's crying eased when her arms closed around him. Maybe he recognized the smell of her skin, the way of her breathing. Maybe he simply felt the steadiness in her old bones. Scylla looked down at him. His eyes were squeezed shut now, his mouth working as if already searching for milk, for comfort. The edge of the linen had slipped. A sliver of the dark mark showed. "Jonah," she murmured, without knowing where the name came from. Perhaps from some half-remembered sermon about a man swallowed by a storm and a great fish and spat out again onto strange shores. "You lil Jonah, pulled up out of the deep when folk ain't want you." Lightning flashed again. This time it was close enough that the crack of thunder shook the window panes in their frames. Somewhere in the house, a child, not Caroline, not yet conscious, began to wail. Scylla turned toward the door. As she crossed the threshold, the governor spoke once more. "If any person in this house," he said, pitching his voice so that every servant hovering in the corridor could hear, "ever breathes a word about a second child, they will be whipped, sold, or worse. No one will speak of any mark. No one will mention such foolishness. There was one child born this night. One. And that is the story Charleston will know." The house seemed to breathe in, then out. Scylla tightened her hold on the boy named Jonah. She moved down the back stair, away from the polished banister and gleaming portraits, into the narrower, hotter passage that led toward the rear of the house. Shadows there were thicker. The smell of lye and boiled cloth and cooking fat grew stronger. Behind her, the music of society resumed, faintly, as if nothing in the great house had changed at all. In her arms, the child who bore a mark no one dared speak about quieted, his small heart beating fast against her chest, as if already aware he had been born into a world determined to pretend he was not there. Years went by before anyone outside that house would have reason to remember the night of the twins' birth. Storms came and went. Men rose and fell in the assembly. Ships docked and departed with the tide. But under the palmettos and along the narrow alleys of Charleston, people who had no vote and no voice remembered the stories they were not meant to tell. On summer evenings, when the work in the Harrow house was done, and the last of the silver wiped free of its master's fingerprints, the enslaved women would gather in the courtyard by the kitchen door. They sat on overturned buckets and worn stools, skirts like dark puddles around their ankles, hands busy with mending. Their talk flowed in low currents, careful to eddy around the listening walls. It was on such an evening 8 years after the storm that a boy sat on the worn brick steps and listened without seeming to. He had been born in that house and yet did not belong to it. He fetched water, hauled wood, polished boots, slept on a pallet in the corner of the pantry. His name in the ledger and on the overseer's tongue was Jonah. He knew nothing of the night of his birth. But he knew intimately the mark that had come with him into the world. It had grown as he had grown. At 8 years old, it stretched from his left shoulder down across the upper curve of his chest, a dark, twisted shape that lay under his skin like something coiled there. In certain lights, it looked more like a rope, in others like a brand. In all lights, it drew attention. The other children avoided touching it. The first time another boy had slapped Jonah's bare shoulder in the heat of some quarrel, his eyes had widened, his hands snatched back as if burned. "Feel like bad luck," he muttered later where Jonah could hear. "Like touching a grave." The grown women did not call it that, but he heard in their murmurs when they thought he was not listening words that tasted of old fears. "DeMark," one would say, shaking her head. "Ain't never seen nothing like it." "Like de iron, you mean," another would answer, voice dropping. "Like de Harrow brand." "Hush now," the first would say quickly, glancing toward the house as if the plaster itself might be listening. "You wan dat boy sold up river." Jonah did not know what it meant to be sold up river, not in any full way, but he had seen the hollow eyes of those who had returned from rice fields farther south, when masters traded hands. He knew enough to know it was a place where bodies rotted slowly in water, where fever came like a thief and took people in the night. He had no memory of any other place, but sometimes when he woke sweating from dreams he could not name, he thought of running, of slipping out through the kitchen yard, past the stable, onto the street, and vanishing among the crowd of dockworkers whose faces were not so different from his own. Something in him always stopped. Something small and stubborn and scared, perhaps. Or something else, something that felt like a thread tied, invisible, between his chest and the house. That evening the air sat heavy, perfumed with jasmine and the tang of the harbor breeze. The courtyard bricks still radiated heat. A cat dozed in the shadow of the rain barrel, tail flicking occasionally when a fly ventured too near. Scylla sat on her low stool, mending a torn shirt with hands that moved as surely as they had the night they caught him. Her hair had gone nearly entirely white now, a cloud beneath her worn headscarf. Her back curved like a question mark. But her eyes remained sharp, taking in far more than anyone assumed. "Girl up Dara done got her music lesson again," one of the younger women said with a sniff, jerking her chin toward the upper floors. Faint above them, the tinkling chaos of a piano sounded, interrupted by stops and starts as a teacher barked corrections. "Them fingers of hers hit more wrong notes than right," another woman said, laughing softly. "Miss Caroline Ain got no more rhythm than a lame chicken." They laughed, but there was no malice in it. Most of them had seen the girl grow from a pink, squalling bundle into the pale, willful creature now pounding on the keys upstairs. They had washed her shifts, dressed her hair in tight plaits when she tired of curls, soothed her cries in the nursery at night when the governess's patience ran thin. Their hands had steadied her first steps. Caroline Harrow, at 8 years old, had never fetched her own water or polished a pair of boots. But she knew the names of every person who worked in her house, and sometimes, when no one was watching, she would slip her governess's supervision and sneak down to the kitchen to steal warm bread from the oven and share it with whoever happened to be there. Jonah had seen her once or twice. Up close, in the half-shadow of the scullery, she had struck him with a strange, stunned recognition. Her hair was lighter than his, a pale gold that caught the light. His was a rough, dark brown that curled tightly when wet. Her skin was much lighter, too, and soft in a way his could not afford to be. But her eyes were the same shape as his. The same pale green flecked with darker, the same way they narrowed when she concentrated, the same slight tilt at the outer corners. It was like looking into a glass that showed what he might have been in another life. He had said nothing. He was not permitted to speak to her unless spoken to, and even then only to answer yes, miss, or no, miss. But he had watched the way her mouth twisted when the governess scolded her, the half-defiant, half-pleading expression he had seen in his own reflection on nights when he scrubbed his face in a basin. From the corner of his eye, he saw Scylla's gaze flick toward him, then toward the upper windows where Caroline's halting piano scales drifted down. "World a funny place," she said, more to herself than to anyone. "Some folk born on top o' de hill, some born under it, and de blood don ask where it gone fall." Jonah knew better than to ask what she meant. When Scylla spoke like that in riddles, it usually meant she had strayed too close to something a master might call insolence and a preacher might call blasphemy. But he felt the words sink into him like seeds into damp earth. "Storm common," one of the women said, squinting toward the narrow slice of sky visible over the courtyard wall. "Storm always common," Scylla snorted. "Question is, who it common for?" They laughed again, but this time there was a thread in the sound Jonah could not name. He pulled his knees closer to his chest and wrapped his arms around them, feeling the evening's dampness settle on his skin. Later that week, it was his turn to carry clean linens up to the nursery. He balanced the stack carefully, the cotton still warm from the sun. His bare feet made no sound on the polished wood of the back stairs. He knew every squeak, every spot where the boards dipped, every patch of wall where the plaster had cracked in a spiderweb pattern. As he rounded the last curve before the nursery door, a voice reached him. Not a grown woman's and not the thin whine of an infant. A girl's voice humming something that was meant to be a song. He hesitated, one foot on the next step. The door to the nursery was open. Inside, he could see the edge of the small bed with its white embroidered coverlet, the row of carefully arranged dolls along the mantel, the rocking horse near the window. Caroline stood by the cradle where she had once slept, though she was far too old for it now. She had stuffed it full of books and was rummaging through them as if searching for one that had run away. She wore a white dress with tiny blue flowers and a blue sash that someone had tied too tight. Escaped curls clung damply to her neck. Her humming stopped as she straightened, a book in hand, and caught sight of him. For a heartbeat they stared at one another. Jonah swallowed. The weight of the sheets in his arms suddenly felt enormous. "You're not supposed to be up here when Miss Pritchard's out," Caroline said, but there was no real censure in it, only curiosity. I was told bring in de linen, miss," Jonah said quickly, the words tumbling out in the tone he'd learned to adopt around white children. Soft, unthreatening, careful. "Ma'am and de wash house say nursery needs more." "Oh." Caroline looked at the stack in his arms as if it were something she'd never really considered before, that her sheets did not simply appear, that someone carried them up from somewhere. "You can put them there." She pointed to the chest at the foot of the bed. He moved past her, skirting the rug's edge. He thought he had left enough distance, but as he turned, the edge of one folded sheet brushed her hand. Their skin met for a fraction of a second. It was nothing, the barest contact, a chance touch. At least that was how any sensible person would have described it. But the instant her warm, smooth fingers grazed the back of his knuckles, Jonah felt a jolt. Not of pain, not exactly. More like the sensation of stepping into surf when a wave comes higher and stronger than expected, sweeping your feet from beneath you. Images slammed through his mind. A room full of candlelight and sweat. A woman's hoarse cries. Thunder outside. A man's voice, low and hard, saying there was only one child. He stumbled, the sheets almost slipping from his grasp. At the same moment, Caroline gasped softly. Her eyes went wide, pupils dilating. Her fingers flew to her chest, pressing just above her heart. "Did you feel that?" she whispered. Jonah's own heart thudded so loudly he was sure she could hear it. "Feel what, miss?" "Like," she frowned, struggling for words. "Like when you stand too close to a storm and the air is thick. Like it's full of something. It felt like that, in my fingers." Jonah, who had never before in his life thought to call the air thick with anything but heat and dust, nodded slowly. "Yes, miss," he said. "Maybe storm common." She glanced toward the window. The sky outside was a pale, cloudless blue. "It doesn't look like it." She hesitated, then stepped closer again, peering at his face. Up close, the resemblance he had noticed in the kitchen seemed even more pronounced. Her gaze flicked down to where the neckline of his worn shirt sagged, revealing the upper curve of the mark on his shoulder. "What happened to you?" she asked, reaching out as if to touch it again. Before her fingers could make contact, a voice snapped from the doorway. "Miss Caroline, step away from that boy." The governess, Miss Pritchard, stood there, her thin frame rigid with disapproval. She wore her habitual expression of having just bitten down on something sour. In one hand she held her ever-present ruler, used more often on Caroline's knuckles than on any wayward page. Caroline drew back, color rising in her cheeks. You were only consorting with the help," Miss Pritchard said crisply, "an activity your father would not approve." "My grandfather," Caroline corrected automatically. "My father is dead," Miss Pritchard said, in the same tone she might have used to state that the sky was up and the ground down. "Yes. And your grandfather, who stands in his stead, would be greatly displeased to find you alone with a boy servant." The word boy carried a weight that had nothing to do with age. Miss Pritchard's gaze slid to Jonah and her mouth thinned. What is your name?" "Jonah, ma'am," he said, his throat dry. "Jonah." She said it as if testing a sour taste. "You are to bring linens and leave. You are not to dally, loiter, or engage Miss Caroline in conversation. Is that understood?" "Yes, ma'am," Jonah said, staring at the floor. Caroline opened her mouth, then closed it again, her jaw working. She was not yet old enough to fully understand power, but she had been raised among those who wielded it. She knew when she could push and when she must swallow. Miss Pritchard stepped aside to allow Jonah to pass. As he slipped out, she added, "And keep your shoulders covered. It is indecent to have that on display." She did not need to specify what that was. Jonah tugged his shirt higher, feeling heat rush into his face. He hurried down the stairs, the phantom of that strange, electric touch still tingling in his fingers. As he reached the lower landing, he found Scylla waiting halfway down, one hand on the banister as if she had known somehow where to intercept him. She took one look at his face and sighed. "Child," she said, "what you done gone and do?" "Nothing," he protested, though his voice shook. "I ain't do nothing, Scylla. I just touch her hand." "On accident." Scylla closed her eyes briefly. "Sometimes dat all it take." "What it mean?" Jonah asked, surprising himself. He rarely asked about meaning. Meaning was dangerous. Men who looked like him had been whipped for less. Scylla looked up toward the ceiling as if she could see through floors and plaster to the nursery where a little girl now stood, perhaps, staring down at her own tingling fingers and not understanding why. "Two seeds from the same fruit," she murmured. "One fall on good earth, one fall on stone. But the rain dawn know the difference when it come down, it fall on both." Jonah frowned. "You talk in riddles again." "Maybe." She reached out and cupped his chin with her calloused fingers, turning his face gently from side to side. "You feel anything else, any hurt in dat mark o' yours?" He hesitated. Then, reluctantly, it burned a lil when I touch her." Scylla's eyes grew distant. "Fire know its own," she said softly. Jonah opened his mouth to demand a clearer answer. Before he could, a shout echoed from the back courtyard. "Fire! Fire in the smokehouse!" They both froze for the briefest of moments. Then Scylla moved, faster than her years should have allowed, hobbling toward the rear of the house. Jonah followed, his bare feet slapping on the wood, his own heart already racing ahead of him. By the time they reached the courtyard, smoke was pouring from the low brick building where meat was cured and stored. Flames licked greedily at the edges of the open doorway, casting a demonic orange glow on the surrounding walls. Men and women ran back and forth, some forming a haphazard line from the pump, passing sloshing buckets, others yelling for someone to fetch the overseer, the governor, anyone. Sparks spat up into the darkening sky. "Keep back!" The overseer, a red-faced man named Isaac, bellowed as he barreled into the yard, whip still hanging from his belt. You, he jabbed a finger at Jonah. "What you standing there for? Get that bucket." Jonah seized the nearest bucket, his arms already shaking with the weight, and joined the line. Water splashed onto his legs, soaking the bottom of his trousers. Heat rolled out of the smokehouse in thick waves, singeing the hairs on his arms as he passed the bucket forward and received another. Something tugged at the edge of his awareness, a throb beneath his skin that matched the pulsing of the fire. His shoulder ached, the mark there prickling as if the flames licked at it directly. The fire was not large, not yet. With enough water, enough frantic labor, they might contain it to the smokehouse. But as Jonah slid another bucket along, his gaze snagged on the interior wall of the low building. Through the flicker and the smoke, he saw it. Where the fire had eaten away at the layer of old soot and salt, a pattern burned clearer and darker on the brick. A circle, broken at one point. a tail twisting down. For a heartbeat it glowed as if the brick itself bore a brand, the same shape that lay on his chest. His breath caught. The bucket slipped in his hands, sloshing water onto the ground. The man beside him cursed and shoved him. "Pay attention, boy," Jonah blinked. When he looked again, the shape on the wall had blurred, lost in the charring. Perhaps it had never been there. Perhaps the smoke had only played tricks on his eyes, but the ache in his mark remained, throbbing in time with his racing heart. By the time the last of the flames had been beaten down and the smokehouse reduced to a steaming, blackened shell, the courtyard was filled with the stench of wet ash and burned salt pork. The governor stood in the kitchen doorway, his face grim, lips pressed into a hard line. Beside him, Miss Pritchard held Caroline's shoulders firmly, keeping her from stepping too close to the spectacle. "Carelessness," Nathaniel Harrow said flatly, surveying the damage. "Pure and simple. Some fool left a coal where it oughtn't to be. Nobody volunteered to be that fool." In the silence, the sound of dripping water and cracking, cooling wood seemed unnaturally loud. His gaze swept over the gathered servants, lingering a fraction longer on Jonah as the boy stood panting, hair plastered to his forehead with sweat. Scylla watched her governor watch the child she had brought into his house. Her mouth tightened. Later, when the worst of the mess had been cleared and the overseer had decided, ultimately, to blame no one specifically, perhaps because he feared that any whipping he ordered now might be seen by the governor as drawing attention to his own lack of oversight, Scylla found Jonah by the rain barrel, splashing his face. She saw at once the reddened skin around the edges of his mark, as if someone had pressed something hot nearby. She reached out and pressed her palm lightly against it. He hissed, "Scylla, that hurt." "I know." Her fingers traced the outline gently, memorizing anew the shape she had known since the night he first slid into her hands. "You listen to me, Jonah. Fire talk to you. You feel it when it close." He swallowed. "I don't like it. Ain't no matter whether you like it." She met his eyes. "You come into dis world carryin' the thing folk round here spend they whole lives tryin' to hide, the truth of what they done. Dat mark on you it like the Lord done write a story in a book before anybody else can pick up a pen." "I can't read," Jonah muttered. She gave a short, humorless laugh. "Maybe one day you will, maybe not wit they letters, maybe wit something else." He stared at her, frustrated. "What you want me to do 'bout a firebrand on a wall, 'bout my shoulder hurtin' when I ain't touched no flame? I'm just a boy." "Fo now." Scylla's eyes went distant again. "But time ain't stand still, Jonah. Not for nobody. One day that girl up dere," she jerked her chin toward the second floor, "gon' be walkin' in pretty dresses to concerts and balls. And you gon' be somewhere. World think it know where to put you, but it don' know 'bout marks it can't wash off." He thought of Caroline's face, of the way her eyes had widened when their skin met, as if she had felt some invisible wire tighten between them. He thought of the fire, of the shape in the smokehouse brick. "I ain't want no trouble," he said finally, almost pleading. "I just want—" He stopped. He did not know how to finish the sentence, to be left alone, to be seen. Both tugged at him in opposite directions. Scylla patted his cheek with a gnarled hand. "Trouble don' ask what you want, Chilly, it just come. Question is, when it knock, what you gon' do, open the door or let it break it down?" He glared at her. "I told you I can't read, and now you talk like a book." She smiled then, for the first time that day, the expression creasing the deep lines of her face into something fierce and fond. "Maybe you ain't know it yet," she said, "but one day folk gon' read you." He did not understand. Not then. But years later, when Charleston's summer nights ran red, and the river carried more than driftwood, when whispers rose about a boy with a mark like an old, forbidden brand and a girl with the same eyes in a house on Meeting Street, he would remember the way her words had felt. Like the first distant rumble of thunder before a storm you can no longer keep from breaking.